Hello, everybody here in Miami and everyone in Brazil and everywhere else online around the world where you may be watching. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank Stephanie Crosby, Nick Backish, Nicholas Ramiar, and everyone here at the World Strategic Forum for having me here today. I'm going to talk about a very sensitive subject. It's the U.S.-China relations. I first went to China in 1979. I lived in China, if you can say Hong Kong was China, for 24 years. For the first 5 years, it was the UK, and for 19 years after that, it was, of course, China. I've been doing business in China for over 3 decades, and sometimes in China for more than half the year. I've come here to tell you a little bit about some of the macro and then focus in on my industry, which is the film and television industry, to sort of illustrate some of the points that I'm going to make. Typically when you're in Hong Kong, or definitely when you're in China, you have to be very guarded. Everyone should be very guarded about what they say about China, because literally the walls are listening. I don't know about the walls here tonight, but I'll just sort of touch on some of the things that I think are potential stress points for the relationship between the U.S. and China. And there are many, but certainly we in the business world are concerned about trade policies, and there are all kinds of trade wars that have been going on over the years, human rights in my hometown of Hong Kong, as well as many other places in China with minorities being discriminated against. It's a large, important issue. But certainly the issues with the most potential for damage to the world have to relate around some of the more geopolitical and even military aspects of the relationships in the Pacific region. Of course, there are all of these things that we're reading about in the days past about warships going into different areas and planes flying over. There could be a miscommunication that would lead to some catastrophe. Of course, a trigger-happy serviceman could perhaps overstep his judgment, and who knows what could happen as a result of an armed conflict. But of course, the real sort of concern that a lot of people have, and after having lived in Hong Kong, where Hong Kong was, of course, converted back to being part of China in 1997, the issue of Taiwan is an important one, and it wouldn't take long for China to take over Taiwan. Certainly the estimation is 24 hours is about as long as Taiwan's military could hold out against China. So, that China's seen us as the American military pull out of Afghanistan. Do we have the stomach to go and fight China over perhaps their takeover of Taiwan? One would assume not, and certainly the leadership in China might want this as their legacy, something that they could point to that they've done to really unify the country of China with Taiwan, as they wanted to do for a long time. While these are some of the issues that I think our panel are going to touch on today and discuss, there's a lot of issues on the bright side that we can sort of focus on as well. And areas of collaboration, climate change, serious problem. China, U.S. are major contributors to the problem, and also potentially solutions. There's a lot of areas in the world where we could work together, not only geopolitically, but also in areas of research, and China's research into cancer medicines and all kinds of areas of technology are areas where we should be collaborating to create efficiencies. In the film and television business, really work in the area of partnerships and working with companies in China. We work with some of the best companies in the film and television industry. I've launched over 30 TV channels in my career, and many of them are in China. But what's interesting about China is, they play such a long game. They're really in it for the long term, different from the U.S. that is driven by political cycles and economic cycles. China is not afraid to take a hard position. In the case of the entertainment industry, the United States was always the #1 box office market in the world for the history of the film business until this year. And, China perhaps was, that was inevitable that China was going to take over the U.S. in terms of box office revenue, but that was perhaps accelerated because of, the COVID situation, no doubt. But it was inevitable, and it certainly did happen, at least so far this year. They put up very significant barriers to foreign films and TV series coming into China, limiting the number of films that could be distributed, the times of year, and the number of screens, the time slots on television. So there have been all kinds of periodical pushes against the government and the officials there to try to open up, but they've only met with limited sort of success in that regard. And the result of this has been that China's film and television industries have boomed. That is a result of this strategy that they've had. New cinemas are being built there at an incredible rate. And of course, the streaming platforms have taken off all at the same time with the great infrastructure that they're building there for the internet and access to digital content. So you can see here on the top chart, the cinema screen count, how it's gone from, a very small fraction of what the US and Canada's screen count is, and US, Canada, you can see, is rather flat at 44,000 screens here, and China has just shot up in the last few years to pass us now at 76,000 screens. They've been opening 25 new screens every day in the recent years, which is just phenomenal. The box office, of course, has risen along with that. Ticket prices being less than the U.S., that hasn't quite caught up to where the U.S. is, but ticket prices are going up, screen count is going up, attendance is increasing as the middle class increases in China, so you're seeing incredible gains in box office. And, the share of the local market here, you'll see China was, before the pandemic, 64%. The Chinese films were accounting for 64% of the box office. Largely the rest was Hollywood films. But with the slowdown from film production in the U.S. and the fact that China dealt with their pandemic perhaps a little bit more effectively, so that production and people could go back to the cinemas, so the production could continue, people could go to the cinemas, the box office share has gone to 84% last year, and I suspect it'll be higher this year. And you can see here that there's a close association between vaccination, COVID recovery, and the prospects for the box office in China and around the world. I think that what this slide says is that while this is a global comparison of, on the sort of straight line at the top, the growth of VOD, video on demand, streamers, the likes of Netflix and Amazon around the world, to see their growth of where we are today. They were on the path to pass cinema before COVID, and of course, COVID only accelerated that as people stayed home and didn't go to the cinemas, and people did go, of course, to sign up for new streaming services, and that happened in China and everywhere else. But you can see that there will be a recovery that's estimated. It was, without the new variant, you would have expected to be 2023, but I think now we're looking at 2024. So the cinema business should get back to where it was, but it still is being passed and surpassed by the streaming business. A lot of that business growth came from the television channels, where people are moving away from that to see what they want when they want. And so, as it is now, China, with their penetration getting very close to where we are in the U.S. with the VOD business, this long-term strategy that they've had there has been a very effective one. And, as I said earlier, what can we do? It's very hard to get your films sort of imported and to do business there. They limit foreign companies from opening up production companies and doing distribution on your own over there, and TV channels are very restricted, foreign TV channels. So what we do as our company, we actually work very closely with Chinese companies to produce Chinese films with them. We bring intellectual property from all over the world. From our 14 partners, we control over 21,000 titles, and we work with the best Chinese companies to make films and television series that also go to streamers in China. And we also take Chinese content from China, readapt it, remake it in other countries in local language, and so we're sort of using the soft power of the film and television industry, which is considerable, to create better relationships with China and to sort of take China out of China. Because although when I used to be the president of Sony Pictures in Asia, before that I was the president of Walt Disney Pictures, and we started making local content over there. We made Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon about 20 years ago, and that was the biggest foreign film ever in the United States, and that still is. And so it really is not easy to make Chinese films that will do very well around the world, but it is easier to take Chinese stories and adapt them and make them in local languages in the US and other places. That's what we're doing. So this in a nutshell is just to give you an example of what the possibilities are against a very restrictive access to China, and I'm sure, and that's what we have done, but I'm sure our panelists today are going to be very adept at showing the way for how to operate in China and how US might work with China in the years to come across many industries and many aspects of business and life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Bringing the panel on that's going to talk about the future of U.S.-China relations, and in particular telling us some very interesting insights about the film industry in China. Hello everyone, my name is Francisco Sanchez. I'm the former United States Undersecretary of Commerce for Trade. I had the privilege of co-leading the U.S.-China trade relationship for nearly 5 years when I served in that capacity. Today, I'm a partner in the law firm of Holland & Knight, and I have the great privilege of moderating today's panel. We have a very distinguished panel. Each of our panelists will do an initial 5-minute presentation and give their perspectives on the future of U.S.-China relations, and then we'll open it up to a series of questions. So without further ado, let's begin with our first panelist, John Quelch. John, please introduce yourself and share your perspectives with us.
Well, thank you, Francisco, and congratulations to Miami-Dade College for again putting on a great program this year. In a recent op-ed in the Tampa Bay Times, I laid out a 6-point plan for the U.S. to reboot its relationship with China. Point number 1 is to rediscover our allies. And many people say that the road to Beijing passes through Brussels. I'm very pleased to see that the new administration is making great strides to rework our relationships with our European partners and to exert more influence in that regard, especially since at the end of last year, before the handover in the administration here, the Chinese very cleverly signed a trade agreement with the European Union, which was largely pushed by Chancellor Merkel in Germany to protect the auto industry investments that had already been made substantially in China. But we have to do more in terms of redeploying our efforts to rediscover our allies. Number 2 is a massive increase in research and development. We are not going to beat China unless we beat them on R&D and innovation. And that competition, frankly, is going to be good for consumers worldwide. To have 2 real powerhouses going after it, but we have to make sure that we're investing at least 4% of GDP on R&D. Number 3 is to diversify our supply chains. We see in recent weeks and months the risks associated with dependency on China. There is a tremendous amount of problems, which I think 1 or 2 of our other panelists are going to discuss in relation to the blockages on the movement of goods out of China due to container ship problems at the ports. We need to diversify our supply chains, but frankly, it's not that easy to shift production to Vietnam or to shift production to Indonesia, Philippines. You know, there's a lot of capital investment, there's a lot of training of labor that needs to be done, and it's frankly not something you can turn the switch on overnight. Number 4 is to call out China where China's making mistakes. And China has made a lot of mistakes in terms of what we call debt trap diplomacy with respect to the partnerships, quote unquote, that it has secured with third world countries, particularly in the area of acquisition of strategic assets, in particular ports in Sri Lanka and elsewhere, where China has made massive investments, and then the local country has not been able to repay the interest on the loan, and as a result, those assets then are sequestered by the Chinese lender. That's a message that we need to share with other countries to make sure they don't fall into the same trap. Number 5 is we have to do a better job of promoting our own values. I think in respect of China's international diplomacy, it's largely transactional. In other words, you do this, I'll do this for you, you do this for me. You vote for me at the United Nations, you stop your diplomatic relations with Taiwan, you do something in return for my vaccines, or you do something in return for my loans. We do not operate in that same transactional way. And we have to do a better job not only of emphasizing a long-term relationship approach, but also promoting democracy over dictatorship, because frankly, dictatorship coming out of China looks like it's pretty effective to a lot of leaders in the emerging economies. But then finally, we have to realize that this is not a competition that can occur without cooperation, and we have to communicate at every level, on every dimension, whether it be military, diplomatic, trade, cultural, with China. And there are areas where we can and must cooperate. There are areas where we must compete. And I would like to end by quoting what I think is an excellent quote from Secretary Blinken on the China-US relationship, when he said, quote, "It should be competitive when it should be, collaborative when it can be, and adversarial when it must be." And those 3 adjectives, I think, should set the stage for our discussion. Thank you, Francisco.
John, thank you very much, and that's an apt way to close out your remarks. It really underscores the complexity of this relationship. Our next panelist is someone that I take great pride in presenting to you. He and I were colleagues together at the U.S. Department of Commerce, and he helped me in the co-management of the U.S.-China trade relationship. Craig, it's a pleasure to see you, and take it away. Craig Allen.
Thank you so much. I am currently the president of the U.S.-China Business Council, and I just want to thank Francisco for his years of service to our country. As the lead trade negotiator with China, he did a fantastic job and has created many tens of thousands of jobs in our country. And so what I'd like to do today is just a brief snapshot of where we are on trade and investment, and then a brief look forward. And I look at this from the corporate level and from a microeconomic level, and representing the views of some 260 of our members who are invested in China. So the first thing I would say is that 96% of our members are profitable in China, and almost all of them are expanding their investments in China. And so while there is a tremendous amount of uncertainty and tension within the bilateral relationship, generally business is doing very well and profits are high and investment continues. Now, that is not true across the board. Investments, trade and investment in the consumer goods area is doing very, very well on the basis of the fact that the Chinese middle class is expanding to some 700 million. Our agricultural exporters are doing very well. And indeed, this will be a record year for American farmers and ranchers. The energy industry is also booming. Anyone selling molecules to China is having a record year, and next year looks like it will be better. On the industrial side as well, the business is very good. The problems that we see are mostly centered around the tech industry, but outside of the tech industry, these are indeed boom days. We could talk about tech and export controls and national security in a bit. What I'd like to, if you will indulge me for 2 minutes, is just to take a look ahead. And I think that yesterday in Ambassador Catherine Tai's speech to CSIS, she outlined U.S. trade policy going forth over the next foreseeable period. And U.S. trade policy, as it now stands in the Biden administration, looks a lot like trade policy as it stood in the Trump administration. There has been no major changes whatsoever. I think that most American companies will be in agreement with Ambassador Tai that we need to focus on enforcement of our agreements with the Chinese. Most American companies are looking forward to a extension of the tariff exclusion process that the ambassador announced yesterday. We are also in agreement that we need to be focused on the state-centered, market-distorting practices of the Chinese government. And of course, as John just mentioned, that we should work closely with our allies. And I think a lot of progress has been made there in the Biden administration. That said, there is tremendous uncertainty for American companies investing in or exporting to China. What will the tariff structure be after the Phase 1 agreement? How bad is the infrastructure bottlenecks that we're facing going to get? Will they resolve themselves or will they get better? What does China's participation in the various regional Asia trade agreements mean for U.S. companies? And where will the U.S. government go with regard to the CPTPP, RCEP, or other trade agreements that China is currently advancing? I think that there are a lot of questions out there for CEOs and for companies that are active in the Asia region and in the China region, questions for which we do not yet have answers. As one of my CEOs recently told me, hey, China is my biggest opportunity and China is simultaneously my biggest challenge. What do I do with regard to China? And I think that every CEO in the United States is grappling with a similar problem. Thank you, Francisco.
Craig, thank you very much, and thank you for your kind and generous words. Our next panelist is someone that knows China very well, having done business there for 30 years. Jay Foreman, tell us a little bit about your business and then please share your perspectives.
Sure, it's great to be with you all. I'm in the toy business. As you can see from behind me, those are many of the toys that I make. Some of the best loved, Tonka, Care Bears, Fisher-Price. And my first trip to Asia was 1987, and my first trip to China was 1989, and that was literally 6 weeks after the incident in Tiananmen Square. So you can imagine it was a very interesting time to go to China. Personally, I've made over 120 trips to Asia, and most of them in Hong Kong and China, as well as my team here in the States. I have 60 employees in Hong Kong and 20 contractors up in China. We manufacture 85% of what we make in China, about 15% here in the US. Personally, I've seen China change from the days in the late 80s where almost all industry, and certainly everybody that I worked with, was government owned. Factories and facilities and dealing with state-owned trading companies, to now where every company I deal with is a private enterprise. So it's really been an amazing change. I've seen China go from a developing country to the world's second largest economy, and I assume by the time I'm ready to retire, it will be the world's largest economy. It's certainly been one hell of a ride. Personally, for me, on purpose or by accident, I put all my chips into China on the China line for the better part of 25 years. I've talked with a lot of people about doing business in places like Vietnam and India. I actually ran a maquiladora factory in Mexico in the mid 90s. And I'm still a believer in China as a manufacturer. And lots of times people will ask me, why not make it here? And what I tell them, whether it's the Secretary of Labor or Commerce in Washington or man on the street, it's because, as was said earlier, we can't transfer production to the U.S. that easily and quickly. We don't have the same type of support for the creation and the building of production facilities. And we're sort of in an almost full labor structure here. So the making of toys like the ones you see behind me are sort of low skill and is not necessarily the kind of things we want to be making here. We want to make jet engines and wind turbines and computers and cars and things like that here. I don't think we want to be making Barbie dolls and Care Bears here. So China is really the place. And when people suggest the challenges of China, in fact, what Craig had said, where a CEO is China's my biggest opportunity, is my biggest challenge, I would say for sure, but you can say that about manufacturing anywhere in the world. Believe me, the challenges in Vietnam, India, Mexico, Philippines, just as grave, maybe even more than in China. I always also like to think about China, and I put it in relation in geopolitics to Russia. And you think about the difference between these two countries and the concept of enemy and adversary. And we think of Russia and some of the things that they do to engage with us in a negative way, and in China, but there are very few benefits from any engagement that we have with a country like Russia, but huge benefits that we gain from our interactions with China. So we can consider Russia more of an enemy at this point in time, and China is more of an adversary. So when we deal with business, we're thinking about China as a strategic adversary, but tremendous opportunities and tremendous dependency on one another to survive. When I do business and think about things, I'm thinking global trade, and now my issues are shipping and infrastructure, which are key and actually important for both countries. And it's where we are symbiotically related as the challenges of improving shipping and infrastructure and our business relations. So this is a real unique opportunity for both countries to engage in one area that we have absolutely common interests, which is to make our business dealings with each other smooth and efficient. And the key for engagement is trade. Like I said, I've put my chips with China. It's worked out for me for over 25 years, not only from being able to build my business, but also just in business relations. I've had very good relations with the folks that I deal with in China. The manufacturers I work with are honorable, they're honest, they work hard. And I've really been able to build my business and my career in China. And I'm not trying to be a poster boy for relations with China, but as people are thinking about where to go and how to deal, China is a phenomenal place. It's been great for me. And I think from a geopolitical standpoint, it's very important for us to stay engaged with them. So that's what I've got to say. And I'll be ready for the Q&A a little bit later. Thank you, Francisco.
Thank you, Jay. Really at the heart of this question of the future of U.S.-China relations is commercial, trade. And so it's important to hear from someone who is in the trenches and has been doing business between the United States and China for as long as you have. We're also fortunate to have with us someone that can give us a perspective from a Chinese technology company. And to give us that perspective, let me turn it over to Donald Morrissey. Donald, if you would, please introduce yourself, and then we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Good evening, Don Morrissey from Huawei Technologies US. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the US here. And listening to the comments here, one of the points I wanted to make is not to distract from the issues that remain between the United States and China, but look at the commonalities, particularly in trade and in business. If you look at a company like Huawei, it was a private company, it's employee owned. Last year's revenues were about $136 billion. But its story is not unlike the stories you know here in the United States from Silicon Valley. It started with a collection of about $5,000 from about 6 different investors in 2 rundown apartments in the new economic zone created by Deng Xiaoping in southern China, specifically in Shenzhen. It started in the analog technology, and then it grew through 3 hallmarks that are common to businesses, whether they're Chinese, whether they're American, whether they're Brazilian, or whether they're European. An absolute customer focus, a focus on returning as much profit possible into R&D, which is the lifeblood of a technology company, and a focus on talent, and a corporate governance structure that rewards talent and strives to keep the talent. I don't think any of those 3 issues that I outlined, which are at the core of Huawei's success, are strangers to any of the panelists you've seen here from any of the companies, whether it's EdTech, FinTech, or any other companies you've heard from today. So there are a lot of commonalities in the terms of how global markets are shaped, how global markets are won, and how global markets are competed in. And I think for the US-China trade going forward, the idea of decoupling, and you see some decoupling, particularly in the technology industry going on, and that's worrisome, not just to both governments, but to companies like Huawei. If you look at Huawei's past, our core business is as a vendor for building networks for customers globally. We're in 180 markets globally. Close to 70% of our business recently was outside of China. This is from a company that started with $5,000, made its first big success in rural China because it could not compete at the time with Western telcos, and made a success of itself in Europe and markets outside of China by betting its technology in the global market. Those are the kind of challenges and opportunities that we need to preserve, and I think lawmakers and policymakers on both sides of the ocean need to preserve that and use the examples of companies like Huawei or the big European companies, but even the small ones, especially where digitizations allow small companies to have a global impact and global sales. Those are the ideas that we need to preserve as we're looking at some very specific trade issues. And I welcome further questions so we can have a dialogue going.
Don, thank you very much. Your perspective here on this panel is very valuable, and we're glad you're with us. So let's go into the question and answer period. And let me go back to you, John, if I may start with you. In your opening remarks, you made reference to what U.S. policy to be competitive with China should be. You laid out a pretty clear plan. But I want to take you back a few years. And specifically, I want to focus on the growing tension that has been simmering, if you will, between U.S. and China. And it seemed to be ratcheted up during President Trump's tenure. So my question to you is, was President Trump's China policy the right one, and did you find it effective?
First, President Trump issued a wake-up call on China, which had not previously been made. And from that point of view, I think that was a contribution. I remember many folks 10, 15 years ago warning that China was going to be catching up very quickly with the United States, but these people didn't get much attention paid to them. Even when Mitt Romney, as a presidential candidate, called out China as a, quote, currency manipulator, whether or not he was right or wrong, it was dismissed by President Obama as a bit of an exaggeration. So President Trump, I think, did call out the importance of the Chinese competitive threat, if you want to put it that way. I personally see it more as a competitive opportunity, but we have to face reality that in Washington there are a large number of people who find it convenient to blame China, a country which most of them, by the way, have never visited, for the ills that are befalling the United States. It's, you know, just a classic scapegoating of the rising foreign power. As far as President Trump's policies were concerned, with respect to the tariff efforts, etc., you know, frankly, this was a complete waste of time. If you look at the numbers indicate that there was a fall-off in Chinese trade, import and export trade, for a period of time, but the exports from China have surged in the last year and a half, 2 years, because they got out of COVID quicker than we did, and secondly, because, frankly, as Jay has indicated, there are no other countries that can deliver overnight what China is able to deliver. So all that President Trump's tariffs did were, first of all, core increases on certain goods at the retail store for consumers, or alternatively, forced Chinese manufacturers to become more cost efficient in their production so that they could absorb the price increases represented by the tariffs, so that they wouldn't actually be passed through to the end consumer. So either we penalized our own consumers, or alternatively, we resulted in Chinese manufacturers becoming more cost effective and efficient. You know, the entire process was a waste of time. I'm a great believer in the law of comparative advantage. You know, we should be focusing on high technology and innovation in key sectors, value-added sectors, and not trying to make Christmas ornaments in Cleveland.
Thank you, John. So it sounds like some good, some not so good. Important that there was a call to action, a calling out of China where it needed to be. Tariffs, not so much. Let's move now to the Biden administration, and let me go to you, Craig. In your opening remarks, you made reference to Ambassador Tai's speech yesterday on U.S. policy toward China as it relates to trade. I watched that speech, as I'm sure you did, and I have to say it didn't sound, in many respects, it didn't sound all that different from the Trump administration in terms of its toughness. Can you tell us, how do you see the Biden administration's trade policy evolving, and in particular, what John just referenced, tariffs?
So thank you, Francisco. The Biden administration's trade policy towards China has basically been a continuation of the policies of the Trump administration, pretty much in toto. So yesterday, Ambassador Tai indicated that a year-long review has been completed, and that review has led to the conclusion that the Phase 1 agreement signed a little bit less than 2 years ago should be fully implemented. implementation thus far has been incomplete, and so she will be focusing in her discussions on full implementation of that agreement. Beyond that, it is unclear what the Biden administration intends to do with the tariffs. I would be in complete agreement with John on the utility of the tariffs, and would note that the average American family is paying approximately $1,300 more in their retail bills as a result of the tariffs. But there's no pathway forward that has been indicated by USTR on on whether or not the Biden administration wishes to get rid of the tariffs. We are told to look at the Federal Registrar because a announcement will be coming out soon on the tariff exclusion process. But Ambassador Tai made it very clear that she was looking at a quote-unquote targeted exclusion process, such that the tariffs will remain in large, and those products that will be excluded from the tariffs will be narrowly targeted. I think that the courts play an important role here too. The Court of International Trade in New York is looking at the legality of the 301 tariffs that were put on, not in full, but the 3/4, the retaliatory tariffs. I suspect that whatever decision is made, it will be appealed. But there is a question in the courts about on this issue. I think it's worthwhile also to note that the Biden administration's approach to technology has basically not changed. But again, in the case of Xiaomi, TikTok, WeChat, and one other case in the apparel industry, the Trump administration, some executive orders have been overturned by the courts. And that's a very uncomfortable place for the American departments, for the bureaucracy, to have our own courts overturn executive orders. And so we need to watch that space as well. Of course, the Chinese have an important, have a vote in this as well. They have extended their tariff exclusions to the end of the year. Will we move forward together here, or will it be a one side moves, then the other side moves? Will we have reciprocity in a positive manner towards more free trade, or perhaps reciprocity in a less positive manner towards more protectionism? And I'll tell you, I don't know. But we're watching this space very carefully, and trying to encourage the better angels of our character to explore more comparative advantage, as Professor Quelch just noted. We fall into that camp fully. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It sounds as though Ambassador Tai provided us a framework yesterday, but a lot remains to be seen. Jay, let me turn to you. You have done business in China for nearly 30 years. Tell us what your challenges are today, and if you could sit in the room with Ambassador Tai, what advice would you be giving her as you confront these challenges?
Well, I mean, the biggest challenge right now, of course, it's, all the rage in the media, is the supply chain issues. And again, I say that's a common problem for both of us that we can tackle together. So improving, first of all, in our country, the Congress, really thinking about, with all the challenges and diversity we have, adversity we have in this country, we have one bill that's on the table where both sides can agree on, and that's the infrastructure bill. So we need to get that passed. I believe we will, but it would be nice to do it. And again, the areas of infrastructure are common to both China and the U.S. that will help both countries. Our ports and transportation hubs become more efficient and more technologically sound, as well as theirs. What I would say to the folks in trade and in the government is, again, thinking about China as an adversary, decoupling some of the issues. We've been able over 100 years to do business and have political issues with adversaries for a long time, and we can do that here. Focus on trade, keep it on trade, on fair trade. I think the tariffs, I agree, are ridiculous and need to be removed. And I think if people want to think about a certain level of protectionism, at least in our country, I think we should just be pinning 5 or 10 industries to really protect. PPE was a perfect example this year that we recognize as a country that we don't have enough infrastructure in this country to produce the kind of things that we need to protect ourselves in case of a pandemic or some other issue. We could see it with computer chips. We've got hundreds of thousands of cars that can't be produced because we don't make enough chips here. And as was said, we don't need to make teddy bears in Toledo, but maybe we need to make more computer chips and kind of those things. And we should focus on that. So there's ways to protect our industries here and to foster manufacturing jobs without piling everything onto trade and also demonizing importers and manufacturers that work in China as stealing jobs from Americans. In fact, we're not stealing jobs from Americans. I have 80 people here that work for me in Florida. The average income is over $80,000 a year from those people. And if I wasn't manufacturing in China, I probably wouldn't have that many people working here. So again, it's a symbiotic relationship. And my advice would be for the folks that deal with business, whether it's Janet Yellen or the secretary or the commissioner, is focus on those areas. Let the State Department and the Defense Department handle the other issues. And let's, as they always say, walk and chew gum at the same time. We could do two things and really have this work out for us and for China: human rights, defense, and commerce.
Oh, thank you, Jay. So it sounds like, from your perspective, it's not all or nothing, that we've got to be more nuanced as we think about policy. Thank you very much. Don, let me turn to you, in part because you're in the technology business with a very important Chinese company. And clearly one of the biggest challenges in U.S.-China trade relations and commercial relations is how technology policy and how technology is dealt with. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what can U.S. and China do to be able to move the ball forward in a way that there feels like there's benefit to both countries when it comes to technology?
I think, let me introduce a little tiny bit of humor. The brand for Las Vegas used to be "What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas." And I saw an ad the other day, is "This is how we Vegas." So let me start with a riff that says, "This is how we Huawei." And it gets to some of the issues that you're talking about. First, focus on what's important. Standards, not just standards for construction in terms of telecommunications equipment, but standards for products across the board, standards for cybersecurity, need to have an agreement. And those are not self-evident in state-to-state relations, they're self-evident in the market. Everybody wants that kind of surety within their networks, within their products, and Huawei, frankly, has been a leader in that. Focusing on standards bodies, you have a situation where, coincident with Huawei's focus on, say, 5G, we have 20% of the essential patents on 5G. 5G is the first of going from 1G to 5, where it's completely global and completely set standard globally of the telecommunications network standards. 4G was about an 80% mix, but this is the first time. This leads to less cost for the consumers, more assurance on security, better coverage in terms of telecommunications. So focus on the important things like standards between the countries and in the markets. It doesn't just happen with the governments, it happens in the markets. Secondly, look at issues of where there's commonality on issues like privacy. This is a huge, not only business demand, government demand, it's going to be much more huge consumer demand. Our chief security officer years ago used to say, we don't bolt on cybersecurity. We make it integral to the process, whether it's product development or software development as part of product development. That's actually kind of quaint nowadays. What you need to look at, particularly in these areas, is what are you doing to make sure that data is sacrosanct. In Europe, generally speaking, and I'm not a total expert on this, generally speaking, the laws in Europe show that the individual is sovereign when it comes to data privacy. In the US, generally speaking, data privacy has been left up to, in many ways, to market regulation. In China, it's a combination of both. Working both in the market and with governments to rationalize that, not to the lowest common denominator, but to the highest common denominator, which would be a demand by all consumers, whether they be business consumers or individual consumers, is somewhere where companies like Huawei are striving to be at all times, not just in compliance of regional, state laws, but also push forward where those privacy concerns are most evident, particularly in network traffic, and then come to an agreement on those. That's where you can have agreement on technology. It doesn't take an agreement on tariffs or an agreement on specific trade balances, but have an agreement on the sacrosanct nature of data. Who owns it, who possesses it, who transmits it, who has access to it. That's happening, but it's not happening in the most cooperative, and I would argue most competitive way. Negotiating standards usually leads you to the lowest common denominator. Competing for standards, as we do in a lot of standards biases, gets you to the highest assurance level and an evolutionary assurance level that keeps rising with the technology. Those are some of the areas where we can cooperate. I think also in specific areas for global health and specific health problems, particularly, most people mentioned about competition between the United States and China and AI. One of the advantages that China has is not the specifics of their AI models, but it's the data population that have, which dwarfs the US population. It dwarfs the European population. AI feeds on data and it learns and grows on data. Can that be a useful sharing mechanism between Europe, Asia, and the United States to go at issues that we are currently or have experienced and currently in the pandemic? So I think in those areas of data privacy, that's how we Huawei. In those areas of standards where we excel, that's how we Huawei, okay? And I think if we could apply that philosophy and that operational, long-term operational basis to how the governments and markets cooperate, I think we can all be better off.
Don, thank you very much. I think we could have a panel just on technology policy and trade. And I hope we can do that one day in the future, and would very much welcome you back to participate in it. We're almost out of time. I want to go back to William. And William, kind of a similar question that I asked to Jay. If you could go and talk to Ambassador Tai tomorrow and give her advice on what we should focus on in terms of U.S.-China relations, particularly commercial and trade relations, what would that advice be in the film industry and in business generally? And I hate to do this to you, but you got 60 seconds to answer the question.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that, Francisco. The focus should be on access. I believe in fair trade, fair playing fields, a game where everyone's playing by the same rules. So, in as much as China's content, TV channels, and businesses are allowed access to the United States and most of the countries of the world, I think it would only be fair for all of us to be able to access China's markets as well. As you know, many of the large technology companies, whether it be Google, Facebook, and the rest are not allowed in China. Netflix is not allowed in there. The other streamers, and there's a lot of restriction for us who are making content outside of China. And so our strategy was to make China content in China and work with them to access that huge market, because the only other market other than the US where you can do hundreds of millions of dollars in the box office and make enormous sums, you know, in television and in streaming and production of content as well. So access.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that closes out our panel. I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank the forum. And I want to thank the audience for joining and listening in today. Thank you, and good evening, good morning, wherever you may be. Thank you.